Hey guys, so I thought I'd do another tier list by the data video as usual, and for those of you that didn't see my tweet or YouTube community post, unfortunately YGOscope no longer allows you to search players by username because Dueling Book anonymized their data. This means sadly I can no longer do my typical meta-analysis of the top 25 ranked players or rogue analysis or any card specific analysis anymore, but the creator of YGOscope did tell me that they will bring more data like deck matchups in the near future, so I'll bring some content regarding that, I'm sure. In the meantime, we can still do my tier list by the data video using YGOscope, but I do have to change a component of my formula now, where instead of getting bonus points if a deck was played by the top 25 ranked players, it's going to get bonus points if the deck was represented in the top cut of the most recent YCS, in this case YCS Hartford. As for the top 32 of YCS Hartford, this was the breakdown, and again, thanks to Bold Spider for creating the graphic, and don't forget to check her channel out. As for how the decks are categorized into tiers, this will still be the same as before, and you can watch my previous tier list calculation video in the description below if you want to learn more on how the score was calculated. Now, YGOscope is amazing, but not without its limitations. Right now, it doesn't seem to be able to identify any punk variants, so sadly, decks with this engine will not have a score calculated, which is too bad since it clearly got a lot of representation in the top cut of the YCS as well as various nationals. As for Branded Despia, YGOscope doesn't identify this deck specifically, but just says Branded overall. So for the purpose of this video, we're gonna treat Branded as Branded Despia, even though that will inflate the calculation a bit since there's a lot of other branded decks out there. So let's get started with this month's tier list. Starting at number 1 with a very narrow edge over the second deck in score is Branded Despia, which had a pretty good representation in YCS Top Cut and a lot of representation among all players online overall. Although keep in mind what I said earlier, this calculation is potentially including other non-Despia branded decks too, so if the site could actually sparse that out more, then this deck probably falls to at least number 2. After that, Sword Soul, which is probably the true number 1 and was tied for the largest representation in Top Cut at YCS Hartford. Insanely consistent deck that has a variety of tools with not only setting up an Omni Negate and Monster Negate, but with some pops, and the Vishuddha is really nice for removing floodgates as well. After that is surprisingly Sky Striker, which moved up to the tier 1 spot on this data tier list after being in tier 2 for so long. Now of course this deck did win the YCS after all and has been a great deck for a really long time. Really popular online even when it was in rogue status, and while it is getting a lot of flack for being Mystic Mine focused, the deck requires quite a lot of skill to pilot it well. Next is personally my least favorite deck of the format in Floowandereeze, which had a really high win percentage among all players at 62%. Doesn't surprise me too much because it just has too many blowout cards in Shifter, Featherstorm or Wind Barrier that can win games on their own, and the deck has a very high floor and is very consistent. Now I did mention that we can't calculate a score for punk decks because the deck can't be identified by YGOscope yet, but if we could calculate a score, I think it would probably fall in tier 1 at this point, just because it did very well in top cut representation at the YCS, but also various nationals the week prior as well. Along with the Brave Token Engine and or Therian stuff, it's a combo deck that can put up various negates or locks and has a great grind game because of the Therian field spell and their monsters. Now on to tier 2, we start with Eldritch. I'm sure the best variant is probably the branded version, as it not only provides you with a great extra deck monster in Mirror Jade, but the fusion also allows you to dump Eldritch into the graveyard very easily. The deck also topped the YCS too, and it's one of the best grindy decks out there and will be good for quite some time as a pure strategy or as an engine in whatever meta deck. After that, a very close second is surprisingly Salamangreat, which has been in the rogue section for very long, and me personally, I'm not quite sure if I'd put it in tier 2 yet, although to be fair, while it did not top the YCS, it actually topped a variety of nationals in the week prior to that. Getting circled back to 3 on the recent list was nice, and it was always a consistent deck with a good grind game, but also the potential to OTK with access code and update jammer. Then we have Drytron, which is another deck that got beefed up on the last list with Ben 10 to 2, which I was surprised that the card would come back to more than 1 so soon. Also topped the YCS as well, and had a pretty good win percentage in the last 7 days at 57%. The deck is very strong when allowed to go first, and it seems like it's back to bringing out Vanity's Fiend again, which was what it initially did when it was tier 1 after its release. Next we have Dragon Link, which is probably the best deck right now that can utilize the Brave Token Engine now that Prank Kids is dead. The deck topped the YCS and has always been a competitive strategy and still kicking strong despite the new Contact Fusion Albaz monster that gets rid of dragons. Another big brain deck to do well, but very rewarding if you can pilot it well. Then we have another new entry in tier 2 status in ABC. This did not surprise me because the Brave Token and Therian package really makes this deck so insane. The Therian King Regulus is so nice in this deck because it can equip an ABC piece and get you bodies, and the Brave token provides you with an Omni Negate, and then you just throw in that ABC Dragon Buster that can banish, as well as IP Masquerena that they typically set up. It really does put up a formidable board. And next, we have Ad Ignister, which actually is another deck that topped and has always been in Rogue tier in my data videos, although there's always someone ranked high on Dueling Book that pilots this deck, and a tower monster like a rival Ad Ignister really is very hard to out for some decks like Branded Despia. Now on to Rogue decks. We are starting off with DDD, which is yet another deck that topped YCS Hartford. This deck did top a remote YCS a couple months ago as well, and while it fell off shortly after that, looks like it came back to meta relevancy again potentially. A really big brain deck, but the 55% win percentage among all players is quite impressive, so I'm sure that's much higher for those that really know how to run this deck. Sets up a pretty interesting board where they can steal your monsters, have a spell trap negate, and then their field spell that can restrict you in the type of monsters you can summon is pretty cool as well. Then we have Tri-Brigade, which I've been seeing this deck pop up again a bit more lately. Still a good grindy deck that has great recovery, and Revolt is always going to be one heck of a card. Not the tier 1 deck it once was, but they at least got tanky back to 2. Next we have Virtual World, which is another deck that utilizes the Brave token engine and actually had a really high win percentage in the last 7 days online at 62%. The downside of this deck is that it can just be absolutely bricky, but Shen Shen is quite the card as a walking macrocosmos, so that's kinda nice. After that, we surprisingly have Mystic Mine Burn make it this high on the Rogue section, and it didn't top the YCS, although some players may joke that it technically did, with Sky Striker list being Mystic Mine Turbo. Hopefully Konami finally bans this card after that, as it's just not interactive and is terrible to play against, especially actually mind focused strategies that look to prevent you from doing anything else and burning you to a slow and painful death. Then we have Dogmatica Invoke that has just dipped a lot in the last couple of formats with a pretty bad 46 match win percentage as well. The Brandon engine really should have helped this deck out, but I guess not many people are still playing this deck in the current format. Next we have Dinosaurs, which didn't have the highest win percentage either at 48%, but still going to be a solid rogue deck of choice. It can be a going second break your board kind of strategy, or still can be played as a going first with the scrap stuff, although not as reliable with the misc limit. And then we have Altergeist, which is always up there in the rogue category, although for a while now Eldritch has taken this deck over as the better trap strategy, but some people just love the Imperm Faker combo and will play this deck no matter what, and it does tend to top an event here or there every now and then. Lastly, in the rogue section is Phantom Knights, which was once considered a tier 1 deck rather recently, but has fallen off hard now that Anaconda is banned, so they don't have that Dragoon or DPE to rely on heavily. Still a solid deck though, and can also use the Brave token engine, although at the cost of becoming more bricky. And finally, in the other category, we somehow have Trickstars make this list, although it had a pretty bad match win percentage of 47%. I guess the semi-limit of Light Stage improved some interest in players running this deck, and this deck was like tier 1 at some point, and it's got a fun gimmick of slowly burning you, not to mention that Droll Reincarnation combo is just absolutely nasty. And finally, we have Pendulum Magicians, which somehow had the worst win percentage among the deck listed at 43%. Another combo heavy deck that got a boost with the recent ban list, as well as the release of Beyond the Pendulum, which sort of acts like a Walmart version of Electromite. Really solid deck going first, but one of its weaknesses has always been the fact that the deck doesn't have much, if any, space for hand traps, making it pretty weak when losing the die roll. Alright guys, so that was it for this month's tier list by the data. Hope you enjoyed that. Now that I won't be able to do my meta analysis of the top 25 ranked players, I suppose these tier list videos will serve more as an overview of the current meta. As always, I want to thank my Patreons for their continued support, and if you're interested in data content, I'd appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. Take care guys.